Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. I want to welcome the Apex family. It's so nice to see so many friends. I am thrilled to have Brian Donnelly today as our special guest. He and his wife, Julia Chang, are supporters of Apex for Youth. They are both artists who live and work in Brooklyn with their daughters, Lee and Sunny. Brian and I will riff through a number of his works, and after our conversation, I will introduce 6 Apex mentees who will do the real grilling. In all seriousness, these students did their research and have some great questions for Brian. So to kick it off, Brian, let's start from the beginning. What were your grades like? How did you do in school? And how did you become interested in graffiti?
My grades were not the best, Karen. But, I was always interested in art, and I kind of used art as a way to sort of, you know, work my way around the classroom and pass what I needed to pass. It didn't really seem like a practical outlet when I was younger. I always imagined that, you know, it's just an interest, kind of like a sport, and eventually, you'd have to figure out what to do. And I never imagined at that point that it could be a career, or I didn't know anybody. There was nobody around me that had a career as an artist.
And in this picture, we see you on top of a subway car. You look really young there, very agile.
I'm wearing the same outfit, pretty much. Um, no, that train, that's from like 1995. That's a freight train in New Jersey, and I painted one, and my friend Nace painted one like 2 trains next to me. So we kind of took pictures of each other. Like, we went back in the morning and took nice daylight shots.
And then, of course, as a street artist and so well versed with the history of graffiti artists, and you certainly have many, many friends in this arena. What was that like in terms of a community? And maybe share a little bit about how that started your practice in many ways.
I think I was always interested in art and, kind of figuring out ways to get work into the world. And graffiti was just around me. I knew kids from skating that were also painting graffiti, and it is really community based. And you'll be surprised. Like when I was in high school, my friend had a graffiti magazine, and through that, I met kids in Spain, Germany, and I would trade photos with them, or even kids in like Philadelphia or California. They would send me photos, and I would send them photos, of kind of the graffiti that I went and took pictures of, whether it's in Jersey or in Manhattan or the Bronx. I don't know, it's sort of nice. It still is a very community-based art form. I don't think that sort of community exists to that degree in other like contemporary, like I don't really find that so much in sort of like other artists with studio practices and things.
Right. But I love this notion that what you used to do was take pictures and send them through the post, this idea of sharing, which of course, 20 years later, we're talking about Instagram, but a much more personal way of communicating and building community.
Yeah, there wasn't the outlets as there were now. So, I mean, there was a real sort of hunger for imagery of graffiti, and that is how you saw them. There wasn't such a thing as uploading it. Now everything's so instant. Just a different
time.
Yeah.
And with the tag KAWS, one has to ask first, where does the 3 letters come from? And then subsequently, was this something around the notion of a rebellious teenager, or was this really something around the theme of wanting to be seen?
It was, I mean, maybe a little bit of both. Maybe just sort of not wanting, just wanting to exist as an artist. I didn't really see, like, there wasn't like a map laid out for me about how to, be an artist or have work enter the world, and how to disseminate, work into, or grow into like a career or whatever that I wanted to have. So, KAWS, I just gravitated towards the way the letters interlock. And, if you realize you're going to be, in graffiti, you're doing the same name. So you kind of try to figure out something. I also like the fact that it didn't really you know, it's similar to Brian, like it's just the name. It's not a description. It's not really any other association. So it just gives you like a blank canvas, no pun, to build off of.
And then you moved from New Jersey City to New York, where you studied at SVA. And clearly you now started to do these interventions, these now well known, but at the time, very underground interventions with these bus ads. Share a little bit about what we're looking at here.
Yeah, I mean, the previous pieces, the larger billboards, I started doing those in 1993, and I was still living at my parents'. But here is, you know, both of these are from 97. I had just moved to Manhattan in 96, graduated School of Visual Arts the same year. And I started wanting to make things that are sort of closer to my walking paths and things that I can see and share, you know, just with my immediate surroundings, my friends and the neighborhood and whatnot. So I got really interested into breaking into the phone booths and bus shelters and taking ads out, painting them in the studio and returning them sort of, you know, at different hours of the day.
And this is your first toy that you made with the company in Japan called Bounty Hunter from 1999. And I show on the left-hand side some original pictures of Mickey Mouse that was invented in 1928. And on the right-hand side is a very famous film from 1950, which is James Stewart's movie called Harvey, where he had an imaginary friend that was in the shape of this large invisible rabbit. So I guess I wanted to know a little bit about the origin story of this toy called Companion. And do you see these as your alter egos, or are they your imaginary friends? You make a lot of these.
Until seeing this illustration next to my sculpture, I never realized the similarity to Mickey. But no, you know, Companion, at the time, I met this guy Hikaru from Bounty Hunter through this other company, Hectic, in Tokyo, and he was making toys, and he invited me to make a toy, and I didn't really, I hadn't given it any thought before that, but I knew that I wanted to make sculpture, and I never did that before. So I sort of went in the route of what I was doing with painting over advertisements, where I was taking sort of existing iconography and reworking it and putting it back into the world through my lens. And, you know, it's just grown. I thought at the time it would be a one-time thing. You know, I would just make this object and move on. And from that point, it's almost as if it's become a family member. You know, it entered sort of my realm. I mean, is what I think of when I'm making work, and it's sort of what I use to communicate. And I've just sort of built on it and kind of tried to figure out how many, you know, what kind of other iterations can I bring it through to express what I have on my mind.
When I was delving into your work over the last 2 weeks, and it's an expansive body of work, I posed a question to myself, which was, why is your work so popular? And I've arrived at this conclusion, which is you tackle a universal theme of kindness and compassion. And the work here we see is, of course, Michelangelo's Pietà sculpture in the Vatican, where you have the Virgin Mary holding her dying son. And in this piece, this is your work entitled Gone. In this next image, we have a series of work. On the left is your work called Take. And on the right-hand side, we have Raphael, Madonna and Child from 1505, and Mother and Child, 1902, Pablo Picasso. So here, I just wanted to make that connection that you've been looking at a whole range of work, including work that comes out of the Renaissance and perhaps even earlier, and wanted you to talk a little bit, share a little bit around this mother-child theme. Where did it come from? And what it means to you.
You know, for the first 10 or so years of creating sculptural works, I always had this sort of single figure format, and it was this relationship of the viewer and the work, and that was sort of the dynamic. And then starting with a sculpture called Along the Way, I started to create I wanted to kind of create interrelationships between them. And with Gone, I just really, my goal was loss. Like I wanted to communicate loss. And it really wasn't so much thinking about Michelangelo's sculpture as just what would loss be within my work. And then the next slide that you showed, Take, actually that came from my daughter and her penguin toy. And if you went near it, how she would just clinch back, and kind of like her defense mechanism for her stuffed animal. So it wasn't so much of combing through art history as looking across the room and thinking about just my surroundings.
But it all does go back to this idea of protectiveness, a maternal instinct. So I guess just interested to see that thematic so strong in your work, and someone who came from street art to do something that in some ways is quite, for lack of a better word, powerfully feminist, if I can go there.
You know, honestly, whenever I was doing graffiti or doing street art, I never thought of myself, like I never wanted to be a graffiti artist or a street artist. And even now, like to be called a contemporary artist, you're like, what is that? You know, I've always just considered myself an artist. When I was painting, you know, if I was out painting freight trains, I was also looking at classical painting and looking at all painting and art. And I would say under any situation, I would try to avoid being categorized in a way.
So I'm going to quickly shout out to my nephew, Jazz, who I believe is on the Zoom call. He was part of the summer online basketball program where he was teaching some of our Apex community drills. He insisted that I watch Breaking Bad, said that was must-see TV. So over the last 2 weeks, I've watched over 60 some episodes. So for all you Breaking Bad fans, this is Aaron Paul as Jesse. And in season 2, there's this very tense episode where he's playing peekaboo with this kid. And peekaboo is actually a French parlor game. And of course, now it's used every day by parents to develop cognitive skills with their baby. And this is your work from, I think, the 2012 Macy Parade, and wanted to know what your relationship to peekaboo was.
You know, with this work, there was a sculpture before this called Passing Through, but also in this work, I was thinking if I were this sculpture being pranced down the, you know, streets of Manhattan with thousands of kids gawking at me, I would feel mortified with that attention, and like how would I cope with it? And I think this is sort of my natural defense of not so much of a peekaboo, but of a get me through this. And yeah, I mean, that's really where it comes from. The same thing with Passing Through, the sculpture that's very similar to this, but he's in a sort of a sitting position. It was originally exhibited in Kowloon in Hong Kong. And I went to the site and I was told that, you know, for the month and whatever it's going to be there'll be over 1 million people foot traffic. And I was just thinking of, God, if I had to sit here for a month and had people take pictures around me, how would I feel?
Wow.
And that's kind of the origin.
And in this work, this is Damien Hirst, very famous bronze 20-foot sculpture called Hymn, Hymn. I mean, at this point, Damien Hirst is an elder statesman. He's 55 years old. And the inspiration for this work was from a chemistry set owned by his son, and it had this anatomical model. And then this is your version, your homage to Damien. And so wanted to hear from you if you have a friendship with Damien and if his practice has influenced your work in any way, and maybe share a little bit about what we're seeing here in this picture.
The image that you have up is a shop that I opened in collaboration with a company called Metacom Toy in 2006. And it's a store in Tokyo. And as I was working on the design with Masamichi Kariyama from Wonderwall, we were discussing how, you know, there was this format of the store where it was a U. And he said, well, why don't I split all the materials from one side of the shop to the other? So it goes from wood to cement floors, sort of gray stone to white tiles. And then, I thought, well, why don't I just split companion down that same line? And that's originally how that started. With Damien's work, what I like about it is that he has this ability, and a lot of artists do this, but I think he does it exceptionally well, of taking something that you're familiar with and claiming it. Mm-hmm. And it all has to do with, people's knowledge and perception and what they enter, a situation with. I thought when I was doing the companion for Original Fake, being in Tokyo, kids that aren't really following contemporary art will walk in and say, oh, wow, that's from science class. That's, Invisible Man. And anyone with contemporary art, especially at that moment in 2006, where Damien was everywhere, will immediately consider it a reference to him. And, I always keep this in mind whenever I'm thinking about how people view the work. It's always what they have, what their background is, what their what's in their mind, what they're looking at the moment. And I think it's important because you can kind of create work that can exist in so many different formats to so many different people, and that's kind of out of your control. So it really sort of was in tune with the shop, and its title called Original Fake.
Nice. One of the things that many people admire about your practice is you seem to be medium agnostic, that you work in anything that is perhaps a challenge or that you have interest in. In this installation photograph, this is from the High Art Museum 2012, a series of paintings, Gone and Beyond. Your paintings, they're so exuberant. They sing, they shout, the color is so dynamic, quite different from your sculptural work, which is a much more sedate palette. So wanted you to talk a little bit about how you approach color in your work.
Yeah, I don't know why it is. It's not deliberate, why the sculptures kind of are subdued and the paintings kind of become more vivid. I've always loved color. I love painting. I think it's sort of like when I'm painting is when I'm thinking about everything. So, I'll spend sometimes 8 hours standing in front of something, working on it and not realizing that it just zipped by. But it's usually those moments, if I'm painting, I'm thinking about everything else aside from the painting that I'm doing. I feel like at this point, the painting part is pretty natural. And, with the sculptures, I think I'm more interested in the form and kind of bringing the form out. And I don't want to busy it up with colors. I don't want to take away from it. I want you to see the curve. I want you to, have just a few sort of different tonal changes. So it's really about the form of the work. So, but then there's these shaped canvases, which almost become sculptural, like the one in front of you, where it's a combination of the two. I think having the shaped canvas to start with allowed me to be a lot freer with what's within it.
I was going to ask you, I thought it was paint on wood, but shaped canvas,
it's completely stretched canvas around, sort of like a traditional wood panel.
It's pretty exquisite. And then as we move from color and we go through, obviously, all the different characteristics of how one approaches art, I did want to talk about scale and how fluid you are from the tiny to the gigantic. And it reminds me of the architect Rem Koolhaas, who is a famous cultural thinker as well as an architect. And he did a book with Bruce Mau called Small, Medium, Large, XL. And it was a provocation in terms of the way to talk about his architecture, because they work very small with regards to drawings and making objects and making models and doing these master plans, which often look at how you make a city. So maybe share with us a little bit about why scale is important to you and what the interest is for you.
I mean, I like the way things work in different scales. I like the way the relationship can change. Not everyone can have a 30-foot sculpture. And you know, the reason why I continue to sort of make these small sculptural toys is that I just like the way they disseminate into the world, how they can exist sort of in a casual way in someone's house. And, you know, I kind of approached them with the same care that I would do a large piece. And I think in shifting the scales, I'm pointing out that there is no difference between a bronze work and a plastic work, you know, as long as they're both executed in a way that, you know, I would bring it to its end. It's sort of, I don't know, for me, it's just important that the quality is there regardless of the scale. It's not like the large ones are important artwork and the small ones are, you know, insignificant. It's more about the work and the feeling it has and how it can exist around people. And so, yeah, I don't know. I've always liked to sort of navigate in different ways. And there's times when I make something with the intention of being large from the beginning. And then later on, an application comes to make a small version. And also that in reverse.
I mean, this is, of course, a longer conversation, but you do make me think that you, in some ways, are trying to democratize the idea of value through this notion of scale.
No, definitely. I mean, especially when I first started exhibiting, at that point, I had already been making toys for almost 10 years. And so you have younger people walking into a gallery and knowing more about the body of work than the person behind the desk. And I love that sort of shift in dynamic.
So now we're going to go to the portion of the talk where you're going to take us around the world. Share with us where we are in these two images with these now monumental public artworks.
The image on the left is in Amsterdam in front of the Rijksmuseum. And that was part of this exhibition called Art Zuid, which happens, I believe, every year, every 2 years, curated by Rudy Fuchs. And, you know, when he invited me to be part of the exhibition, I was very, you know, I was super excited. I hadn't done work like that, you know, like a public exhibition of that scale. And then when he told me that I was getting this location, I couldn't believe it. So to have this work there for the summer, I mean, in the summer in Amsterdam, it's packed with people, and that whole water, you know, people go into the little pond, and it's just a pretty amazing space. And then on the right is Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which was, you know, this sort of amazing, serene landscape. And they invited me. I think I had about 5 large sculptures like this, and then another whole exhibition indoors. And, you know, really these are both wooden works, but the larger one is in natural wood. And I think having my work exist in that sort of material changed the relationship that people had to it. You know, before that, it was always sort of like plastic or bronze painted to look like plastic. And, you know, I think in these works, it kind of gave a real warmth to the character and almost amplified the mood of Small Eye. This is in Japan, is near Mount Fuji. It was a camping site, and it was part of a series of works that I do called Holiday, where it's a large inflatable work. This is, I think, about 34 meters. I wish there was people there for scale, because you really can't, it's hard to understand the scale. But this is, you know, like with all these projects, they sort of grow. And when I realized that we can have this work under the mountain, like this is one of the, maybe the best sort of sites for to get the mountain and the work in one sort of capture. But it happens to be a camping site. So we decided to turn it into a whole sort of camping exhibition. And we worked with Herschel, and they gave us tons of tents. And suddenly I went from installing a sculpture at a site to how do we accommodate 2,000 campers, you know? And so we kept it up for 10 days. And so the opening was 2,000, but then they kept changing, and people would, you know, make reservations and set up all their RVs and tents around the piece, which was pretty amazing. These are 2 other locations. Actually, the one on the left is in Doha. It's the same piece that you saw in Japan, traveling to Doha. And the one on the right is Hong Kong Victoria's Harbor. And this was really one of the first large scale pieces um, for the holiday series. I mean, we did one in Korea that was pretty large, but this one, just being that we had to bring it through the harbor in Hong Kong, there was tons of different things that we'd never imagined having to deal with, like getting permissions through the different bodies of water from the government. And what you see is an inflatable, but what's under it is a 40-ton, almost like submarine steel structure that's holding it and has all the mechanicals and the, you know, the air chambers to constantly inflate it. And it's, you know, I don't know.
You make it look so easy, right? But obviously to create these type of public art projects, they take months, if not years of planning. And so I do like that opposition and tension where we know that these are projects that just so detailed and expansive and logistical nightmares, and yet they're so light and uplifting.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I want somebody to do is think about the logistics. You know, I want them to just experience the work. Especially with that work, my whole point in that work was to relax. To just, like, I was thinking about what is relaxing. And for me, you know, to like lay in a pool with half submerged, staring up at the sky, I just feel like that is like one of the most relaxing things you can do. And I wanted to bring that, you know, into a large scale. And I also have a great team called All Rights Reserved in Hong Kong that work with me on all these projects and help me navigate them.
And what's kind of terrific is over the last 20 years, you have come full circle in many ways. We started just 20 minutes ago with your interventions, billboards and the busway ads. And now very much on your own terms, you continue to work with the built environment and to be part of the fabric of a city or of a landscape. So kudos to an amazing arc.
Thank you.
Here we have a companion now dressed in a spacesuit. So I have to ask, are you going to try to conquer outer space? Is that the idea, to bring your companions and work with NASA or the Russians?
Well, on the left is the MTV Music Awards, and you can kind of see the scale of the people next to his foot on the right.
Yep.
That was, you know, an interesting project because we had to think about how to like create a large scale impact within a stadium, but you know, you had to load it in through these small doors and set it up in 2 days. And so it was a lot of sort of, I don't know, just challenges. And then on the right is Companion Space, which was a project we did where we actually did send a piece up into stratosphere and tracked it and then found it. You know, we did it in England and we did it over when we were all in quarantine here because there was, you know, other holiday projects that we had planned, you know, to do this year and they all got canceled. And we were still thinking about, well, how can we have a holiday project that can just exist, you know, with the viewers in their home? And we came up with Space. And so we sent them up on this sort of satellite air balloon and let it go as high as it can. And we video documented the whole thing and then just played it. That was the project.
Wow. And then this is the last image we'll show, which is called Papa Smurf. And obviously want to talk a little bit, given that we have a lot of families on the call today. What does it mean, you being a dad of 2 young, wicked smart daughters? How have they changed or added to your art practice? And then on the flip side, how has your art practice informed your parenting?
Well, I mean, this painting was made probably about a decade before having children. But I think having the kids kind of justified the aesthetic that was already happening in my house for years between all the things that I make. It's great. I mean, you know, having kids, it's amazing. It's really, it sort of changes everything. You have sort of a new perspective on just life and goals and, you know, I don't know what more I can say. It's been great. A lot of times I just did this collaboration with these children's sunglasses, and it's really because I wanted to make them for my kids. And then, you know, we just happened to release them globally.
I love that. Your kids as your clients, your first customers. True to my talk show host duties, I do want to plug your next exhibition. Do you want to tell us when and where?
Sure. In February at the Brooklyn Museum, we have my exhibition is called What Party, and it's a survey of work from the last 25 years. And then also, if anyone's tuning from Japan, at the Mori Museum in July.
That is, I want to go to Japan and see.
I know. I haven't been in obviously a little while.
So exciting. So everyone, I believe it's February 15th, the show at the Brooklyn Museum, many of us in Brooklyn. And so now we are going to go to our panelists, our Apex Youth panel. And I am delighted to introduce our first panelist, Mel Cheng, who is a sophomore at the MLK campus. She loves boba bubble tea and KAWS artwork and design. Mel, take it away.
Hi, I'm Mel. So my question is, what inspires your art and how did you come up with your designs and what is the source of your creativity?
I mean, I don't know, that's a really difficult question to answer. I kind of feel like things come at all times, you really sort of have to just be open and observant. And, sometimes I have a project that I need to get done. And my mind just switches off the thing that's not due for a year. And I have no choice but to go work on that. And, I just think it's open to be sort of looking as much as you can and just being open to letting that influence you.
And I think what is so brilliant is, Brian, when you use this word open, as you said, you will look at traditional art, you will look at toys, you'll look at advertisement. Anything is fodder for inspiration, which I think we can all learn from. Amy Guo is a junior at LAB High School and admires KAWS consistency with his artwork. Amy, share with us.
So my question is, I noticed that your work has a common theme with the X's on the eyes. What inspired the iconic KAWS look with the X's on the eyes, and does it have any meanings?
It's not something I intended. There wasn't it's not like a methodical approach of, how am I going to make something that's sort of consistent? It's just when I make work, I almost feel like it's a family member that enters into the body of work. I'm constantly thinking of what have I made before? What can I make that can sort of round out or add to this collection of images that I've created? And so I just think about how to build off, what was my last body of work? If it's a reaction against it, if it's a reaction to it, if it's sort of like an addition to it, and, just sort of stay free and work in that way.
Deanna Shukasiam is a junior at Brooklyn Technical High School, and she enjoys different kinds of art. Deanna.
Hi, so I actually have two questions for you. I know that it can be common for artists to encounter challenges like creative blocks. So I was wondering, how have you overcome challenges or blocks in your artistic process in the past? Also, since you have been creating a lot of art for a while now, I was wondering, how has your art style changed throughout the years?
There's no real formula to getting rid of creative blocks. I think everybody has them. I think it's good to leave the house. Permit it when you're permitted to. But, you just sort of, I don't know. For me, I feel lucky in that I work in so many different mediums, whether, and also I work with a lot of different people. I collaborate with, whether it's companies or individuals. And, just this week, I'm working on different, sort of clothing collections with people that'll come out later on. And I get to sort of delve into things. So if painting is stuck at the moment, I just shift, I shift to sculpture, I shift to design or whatever it may be. And I just sort of, I think if you get to change that, what's in front of you, then your mind gets working. You can kind of come back to something when it's ready.
Great. And then Sam Yi is a freshman at Art and Design High School. She's interested in art and excited to be in conversation with KAWS today.
Hello, I'm Sam. So, since it's really hard for artists to be successful in their fields, I was wondering, how did you first start collaborating with big companies? And what advice do you have for younger artists?
I mean, it's art world's a tricky world to navigate, and I definitely couldn't make a map for the next person. I mean, now I collaborate with big companies at times, but when I started, I collaborated with my peers. You know, they had small companies, and it was sort of like looking around me, seeing who's doing what's interesting, and how I can contribute to that. So it's really, you have to deal with what's around you. And, you know, with myself, I always think of what can I do to add to something? You know, if I see somebody that's doing something that I appreciate, I don't try to take off that energy. I try to think about how I can add to that energy. And then I think if you can present yourself in those ways to people, then you can create opportunities for what you want to make.
Next up, we have Emma Schoon, who is a sophomore at Hunter College High School and part of Apex Youth Ambassadors, where they work on various social justice projects.
Hi, I'm Emma. Going back to a little bit of your career, what are some projects or moments in your career that you find particularly special, which may not be as well known today or as you're well known for?
You know, I think it's as more than just individual moments, it's sort of an accumulation of things. I've always been pretty naively optimistic, and I do appreciate the moments as they happen. So they all seem, you know, like what's happening last week seems like this great new frontier when, you know, maybe from an outsider might not be so impressive. There was definitely strange projects that, you know, like Macy's, doing the Macy's parade. When they called me, I was like, is this a joke? And, you know, so also the MTV Music Awards, they were like reaching out to me to do that project. And in my mind, I was like, what would I do with MTV? I have no clue. I was like, I'd like to design their moon man. You know, this is just thinking to myself. And then, so we took a meeting and they show up and present the deck, and the first page is me redesigning their moon man. So, I mean, you can't, like, things just happen sometimes. And I think it's a matter of, you know, whenever you do get an opportunity to sort of really work at it, don't take on a project if you're not committed to it, because whatever you put out there stays attached to you. And so just try to put out the stuff that you can sort of stand by.
Amen to that. And our last Apex Youth panel list is Mickey Lynn. She's a sophomore at Millennium and finds comfort in the arts, including cooking and writing.
Hello. So my first question was, when you first started doing art in your style, like for example, graffiti, how did people view you as an artist compared to traditional artists like The Birth of Venus or Girl with a Pearl Earring? One sec. And my second question is, if you ever were to go in the future, what do you want people to think when they see your work, and how can they identify this as a KAWS work? How do you want to be remembered?
I'm trying to remember the first one. So when, you know, as far as graffiti, I think it's an art form that doesn't get its due in general for all generations of graffiti. It's, you know, it's sort of taboo in some sense. And I feel like there's almost a brick wall between it and sort of art establishment. And it hasn't really had the correct sort of writing about it or contextualizing or really trying to, like, anyone to really understand it. I think a lot of people look at it and just see a blur of one art. When you're in it, you kind of like really sort of navigate the nuances and I don't know. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. For myself, how would I want to be remembered? You know, that's a tough thing to think about. I just sort of try to deal with what's in front of me at the time and think about doing what project I'm working on now really good. And you don't know how the world's gonna change, how people are gonna look back at things. So I wouldn't waste my time really thinking about that.
And thank you so much to the teens who have put together these questions over the last week. And we have just several minutes left where I'm happy to open up the chat channel for additional questions from our audience, from Brian's friends. We have a first one coming in from the Rogers family, and they have a kind of series of questions that kind of go together. Is how do you balance these large scale exhibitions, international shows? How do you get this work done? What does your team look like? And how do you delegate to make sure you have room for yourself?
I wish I had a little picture of my team that I could just say, this is what they look like. My team's really small. I mean, my studio is 10 people, and that's with myself included. But, you know, we kind of project as if we're larger than we are. But I just think important as you meet people, relationships, you sort of identify who you work well with, and then you sort of nurture those relationships. And, you know, like the company that makes my toys, they've been making them now for 18 years, you know. Same thing with like holiday projects. You know, I met my friend SK and we work well together, and it's been over 10 years now of collaborations, and time goes quick, and you push through, and then you look back and you're like, whoa, that actually got done. But yeah, I don't know really how to explain it. You try to stay on top of things.
Thank you. And we have from Vivian Lee, what is your favorite piece you've ever made?
I don't think you could have favorites. I don't know. You shift what you like from time to time. I don't look at anything and I'm like, oh, I made that piece is great to me. You know, I just sort of see it as a part of a whole.
And let me see. Oh, I like this one. To what do you think you owe your success to besides yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. Earth, the world, relationships. I mean, relationships, I think, are a very important part of any success, whether it's family or business. It's, you know, how you treat others, how they treat you, the energy you put out. So.
And from Chelsea Ma, we have, how do you deal with copycats, especially in Asia? And then what is some advice you might have for toy creators today?
You mean like counterfeits when you say copycats?
I'm pretty sure that, yes, that's what
yeah. I mean, you know, it's a tough thing. It's, you know, with all my toys, there's sort of bootleg versions of them. You can be flattered or you can be frustrated. You know, it's definitely a tricky one to navigate, but if Louis Vuitton can't figure it out, I don't know if KAWS in Brooklyn is really going to crush that network.
Oh, and I really like this question from Ty Lee. I think this goes to everybody, particularly the Asian American community, in terms of the type of ebbs and flows we've been dealing with for over the last 8-9 months. He goes, as optimistic as someone can be, there's always a low point. When do you think was one of your lowest points? And then how did you bring yourself back up?
You know, I think I always have low points. There's constant low points. You can't like I think the key is to figure out how to get out of them, how to, you know, just sort of push on. You're always going to see something that was done better than you did it, or an opportunity you worked at for a year that didn't turn out the way you had imagined. But I think the key is to stay productive, stay active, and kind of keep it moving.
Brian, one of the things you're so famous for is you started collecting artworks of your peers very early on. You've been incredibly supportive to outsider artists, younger artists, this notion where you spoke very much in the beginning in terms of how you build community. You're certainly someone very representative, a role model of sorts. A question is coming in. They would like to know a little bit more about who your current heroes and peers are, whom you're collecting at the moment.
I mean, it's all over the place. I'm not going to name names about artists that I'm collecting at the moment, but, you know, I find it, I don't see it. I mean, yes, it could be worded as supporting, but for me, it's supporting me. It's like, for me, that's energy, that's information. I'm hungry for it. I love being around it. I think living with art gives me a lot of sort of mental space. You know, when I walk into a room and there's other artists' work around, it kind of brings me into their worlds, and I like to go there. So I keep returning, you know. So I find collecting very personal. And yeah, I don't know how to explain it. I guess it's, some people have that bug, and ever since I was little, I've collected things, whether it started with stuffed animals to contemporary art, you know.
I think it's one of those things people often don't realize, that some of the best collectors are artists. I'm going to quickly give a shout out to my Zoom background, which is Alex Katz, who is now in his early 90s. And he started a foundation decades ago, and he collects primarily younger artists and artists who don't have gallery representation. So Brian, you certainly, I think, fall into that same category.
Alex is amazing. Not only does he collect younger artists, but he's donating them to museums. He's putting them into collections. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's great karma, you know, to put it simply.
So there is only time for one more question, and I think I'm going to choose the one that will really wrap this up nicely. Is there a cause you are passionate about?
Apex. Was that the answer? Did I get it right? Yeah, I mean, there's several, Apex being one of them. But, you know, I mean, 2020, it's overwhelming. I feel like there's endless things that you could contribute towards. And it's, you know, as an individual, you feel like you might not really even make a mark. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good people doing good things in the world. And you just figure out the ones that you can work with.
Thank you, Brian. So if everybody can give him a round of applause. And we are going to shift over to Jiyoon, who is the director of Apex, who's just going to give us some quick programming updates in terms of what Apex for Youth is involved in right now.
Thanks, Karen. So so I just want to tell you a little bit about Apex for those of you who are not quite as familiar. So we are a nonprofit organization. We serve underserved Asian and immigrant youth in New York City. We serve about 1,000 students a year through after-school mentoring, educational, and athletic programs. And as you know, this past year has been really challenging. We've seen our youth's needs only increase, and we've responded to fit the needs of our youth. So we have a new mental health program. We have social justice and civic participation workshops, a lot of which the youth here have participated in and led. And we've just done so much more. We're gonna actually share a couple of links. I think Z is gonna share a couple of links with you guys if you wanna look more into our website, follow us on social media. But the thing is, right now we are serving kindergartners through 12th graders. And we haven't really been able to do as much for our alumni. And our alumni have told us that it's really, really tough out there trying to find a job, trying to navigate college. And so we really want to be able to provide services to them. So we just launched a new campaign called 20 for 20. And what that does is it helps us to fund our alumni with some of the services that I just mentioned. So if you guys could help spread the word for us, that would be great. Just let people know about Apex. If you can make a donation, that would be amazing as well. So just want to do that plug for Apex. And then secondly, I just want to say thank you so much to Brian, again, for making the time to be here. I just want to say on a personal note, I really appreciated the empathy that we see in your work. Like the piece in particular that was afloat in the Macy's parade, where you talked about, you know, the self-consciousness of somebody, or how, you know, it's hard to be facing all these people. I think that's something that all of us can really relate to. I mean, even doing this, it's a difficult thing. So I just really appreciated the empathy, the personal aspect of your work, talking about loss and things like that. So thank you again for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you to, sorry. And thank you to Karen for moderating and for being our board member extraordinaire. I could go on and on about how much Karen has done for the organization. So much. She's really supported us, especially this year. So want to do a big shout out for Karen. And then I also want to say thank you to all of our amazing board members who are here. We have some past board members as well as present board members. We really, really appreciate all of your support. So thanks so much for your constant support, helping us in the organization. And want to also shout out all of the youth who attended today, and especially those panelists who did such a great job. Those panelists came up with all those questions on their own. There are amazing youth, and we're so proud to serve them. And also to the volunteers and the donors who make our work possible. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this work. We really, really appreciate it. And I'm gonna introduce Deanna, our youth, in a second, and she's gonna close us out for this program. But before we do that, just wanted to take a moment to do a quick group photo. So if you guys could look at your cameras. And Amy, I don't know if we've asked, Amy, would you be able to take a picture of us? Amy or Yaya?
Sure, I can do it. Amy, I got it.
Okay, great. All right, so
everybody just hold it, because I'm gonna take like 3 in a row, okay? 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more, 1, 2, 3. And last one, 1, 2, 3. Okay, got it.
Great. So just handing it off to our longtime mentee, Deanna. She's been in the program for many years, and she was one of the panelists today. So she's gonna close us out for this program. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, for being here. We really, really, you know, have lots of love and appreciation for all of you guys. Take it away, Deanna.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much, Karen and KAWS, for giving us this opportunity to speak with you. We really appreciate you taking the time to come here today, and I think we all learned a lot from you. As an Apex Many for like 5 years now, I've really enjoyed being in Apex because of all the new friends and memories I've made here, and with not only my mentor, but also all the wonderful people I've met in this program. Thank you again to KAWS and Karen, and thank you to Apex for making this event possible. I think I had a great time, and it was a great event.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye.
Thank you, Apex staff. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.